There comes a moment in every legendary life when the applause fades, the cameras dim, and even the strongest faces their most unforgiving truths. And for Robert De Niro, at 82, those truths have gathered like long, heavy shadows that refuse to step aside. Today, we slowly walk into that quiet place. Not the glamorous world of Hollywood, but the hidden corners where tragedy settles in silence. When discussing the vast and iconic career of Robert De Niro, it becomes almost impossible to separate the man from the myth. For decades, audiences around the world have associated him with characters who carved themselves into cinematic history, figures of strength, intensity, and unshakable dominance. Yet, behind the curtain, reality forms a much slower and much more fragile narrative. In recent years, De Niro has reached a stage of life where every step must be taken with careful reflection, where each new day unfolds with a heaviness that contrasts sharply with his once relentless energy. At 82, Robert De Niro's world is not the world people imagine. It is not a place filled with constant red carpets, lively interviews, or the effortless creation of masterpieces. Instead, it has become a world shaped by deep personal challenges, quiet heartbreaks, and the steady weight of time. The contrast between what the public sees and what the man actually lives could not be more striking. His life, now colored by profound tragedy, reminds us that even the strongest individuals must face the limitations of age, loss, and emotional exhaustion. Hollywood, for all its bright lights, offers little protection from the painful realities of life. And for De Niro, those realities have arrived one after another, drifting into his path with a slow but undeniable force. The man, admired for his intensity in films like Raging Bull, Taxi Driver, and The Godfather Part 2, now moves through a quieter, more complicated chapter, one that unfolds with a kind of weariness most people never see. A chapter where challenges come not from film scripts or directors, but from the gradual unraveling of life around him. For many fans, the image of Robert De Niro remains frozen in time, a powerhouse of endurance, a figure who seemed capable of withstanding anything. But as the years have pressed forward, so has the accumulation of emotional strain, personal conflict, and an inevitable sense of physical decline. The tragedies he faces today are not loud or dramatic. They creep slowly, they echo quietly, they sit in long pauses and unspoken moments. One of the most challenging burdens for De Niro has been the relentless series of personal battles that have unfolded in the public eye. These battles have drained him emotionally, leaving him to navigate complex situations that most people would struggle with even in private. Yet, for someone like De Niro, whose name is recognized across the world, privacy becomes almost non-existent. Everything becomes magnified, from minor disagreements to major life upheavals, and the toll is unmistakable. The aging process itself has created another layer of hardship. Once known for his physical commitment to roles, gaining weight, losing weight, training intensely, De Niro now faces a body that no longer responds as it once did. Age brings limitations, discomfort, and new vulnerabilities. Even everyday tasks can feel heavier than before. What used to be effortless now requires patience, caution, and acceptance. But perhaps the greatest tragedy lies not in the physical changes, nor in the challenges of fame. It lies in the emotional landscape that continues to shift around him. As time moves forward, De Niro has experienced personal losses that cut deeply and quietly. People he trusted, people he loved, chapters of his life he once relied on, they have faded, changed, or disappeared altogether. Each loss adds another layer to his sadness, shaping a quieter and more somber version of the man millions admire.
In recent years, his world has become increasingly defined by legal battles, public disputes, financial complexities, and personal heartbreaks that have unfolded with uncomfortable transparency. These conflicts have not only placed immense strain on his emotional well-being, but have also drained his energy at a stage of life where peace should be his companion. Instead of enjoying a gentle and reflective period of aging, De Niro finds himself navigating turmoil that would overwhelm anyone, let alone someone carrying decades of public expectation. The emotional toll of these struggles becomes even heavier when combined with the responsibilities he continues to shoulder. Even at 82, De Niro still feels the pressure of providing, supporting, and leading. The weight of responsibility does not lessen with time. In some cases, it increases. And for him, it has become a demanding part of his everyday reality. As we examine the slow decline of stability in his personal life, we find a man who has given everything to his craft, every ounce of dedication, every moment of passion, and now faces the aftermath of a lifetime spent in the spotlight. The tragedy lies not in one single event, but in the accumulation of many small heartbreaks, each one settling into the corners of his life. Today, as De Niro moves through this stage, the man once defined by strength now confronts fragility. The world that once applauded him now watches quietly, unaware of the deep emotional fatigue he carries. And in that fatigue lies the true tragedy, not explosive or traumatic, but slow, heavy, and deeply human. This is the beginning of the story. A story not of fame, but of the quiet struggles behind one of Hollywood's. The true weight of De Niro's tragedy becomes clearer when we begin to understand the relentless series of personal hardships that have shaped his recent years. They have not arrived in a single overwhelming wave, but rather as a slow collection of burdens, each one adding pressure to a life already carrying decades of emotional complexity. At the center of De Niro's struggles lies a type of emotional exhaustion that cannot be easily measured. It is not simply the exhaustion of an aging actor. It is the exhaustion of a man who has endured public conflict, private turmoil, and personal responsibilities all at once. And as he moves through his 80s, these pressures have become increasingly difficult to navigate. In many ways, they define the quiet sadness that surrounds
The
him
most
today.
heartbreaking part is how invisible this tragedy seems. Fans still celebrate him, the industry still honors him, and the world still attaches his name to greatness. But behind the public admiration lies a private reality that feels shockingly different. De Niro, once energetic and unstoppable, now moves through his days with a heaviness that reflects years of emotional strain. The man who once transformed himself with fierce commitment now faces the simple challenges of aging, stiffness in his steps, weariness in his posture, and a quiet fatigue that cannot be hidden from those who look closely. A lifetime in the spotlight brings a unique kind of burden. For De Niro, this burden has grown heavier with each passing year. Fame, once a symbol of triumph, has become an anchor, one that drags every personal difficulty into the open, one that magnifies every moment of weakness. Even in his 80s, he cannot escape the constant gaze of the world, a gaze that often fails to understand the emotional landscape he now walks through. The core of De Niro's tragedy is not a single event, but a combination of many. Age, public pressure, personal responsibilities, family challenges, and emotional losses all merge together into a deeply sad picture. They form a long, unbroken chain of struggles that have shaped his life more forcefully in old age than at any other time. These struggles do not shout, they do not erupt dramatically. Instead, they settle quietly, building a type of sadness that feels heavier because it is silent. Even the rhythm of his daily life has changed. What once felt purposeful and lively now feels repetitive and slow. His home, once filled with movement and voices, often feels still. His schedule, once packed with creative energy, now unfolds in longer stretches of emptiness. It is not that he lacks things to do, he remains involved in projects, meetings, and commitments, but the emotional spark behind those actions has dimmed. The motions continue, but the fire that once fueled them burns much lower. De Niro has also faced a series of personal conflicts that have drained him emotionally. These challenges, amplified by public attention, have added layers of frustration and sadness. Legal battles, financial pressures, strained relationships, each one has chipped away at the foundation of his peace. And at 82, these burdens feel far heavier than they would decades ago. They leave a mark not only on his life, but on his spirit. The loneliness of aging is another part of the tragedy that surrounds him. Despite being a legendary figure with global recognition, De Niro must confront the same truth that every aging person eventually meets. The world moves on. New actors rise, new films dominate, new audiences shift their focus. And although he is still respected, the emotional reality of watching time pass while his own body weakens creates a quiet sorrow that few truly understand. Age also brings reflection, and for De Niro, reflection often leads to pain. Memories of people who are no longer here, memories of decisions that caused regret, memories of moments that can never be revived, they flood in often. They shape the atmosphere of his thoughts. They cling to the edges of his quiet days. His life, though filled with achievements, is also filled with chapters he wishes had unfolded differently. And at 82, those memories grow louder, more persistent, and more difficult to silence. Perhaps the saddest part of all is the emotional distance that gradually forms between who De Niro once was and who he is now. Younger fans admire the actor. Older fans remember the legend. But very few people see the man behind both versions. The man who, in the privacy of his own world, carries a lifetime of burdens that fame could never protect him from. For a man who spent his entire life transforming into characters, the greatest transformation he faces now is the one he cannot rehearse for, cannot perform, and cannot control. The transformation of aging and the emotional unraveling that comes with it. This is not the kind of role he can win an award for. It is not the kind of storyline that ends neatly. It is simply a slow, heartbreaking chapter that unfolds whether he wants it to or not. At 82, Robert De Niro's tragedy is not dramatic. It is not explosive. It is quiet, heavy, and deeply human. And as this chapter begins, it becomes clear that his greatest struggles are not behind him. They are the very shadows he carries into each new day.
Part 2. At 82, the tragedy of Robert De Niro is beyond heartbreaking. As Robert De Niro moved deeper into his late 70s and eventually into his 80s, the emotional weight on his shoulders only grew heavier. What many people fail to see is the gradual tightening of responsibilities and pressures that have defined this period of his life. It is not simply the slow decline of age, it is the accumulation of countless emotional strains that have followed him relentlessly. Each challenge, each difficulty has become a thread woven into the broader tapestry of his later years, creating a landscape of weariness that stretches far beyond the public eye. One of the most draining aspects of De Niro's current life has been the constant demand for stability in an increasingly unstable world. At a time when most people dream of slowing down, simplifying their days, and living softly, De Niro has found himself pushed into the opposite direction. His days have become filled with responsibilities that never seem to end. Instead of stepping back, he is continually pulled forward into meetings, into legal processes, into obligations that require his presence, focus, and strength. And at 82, those demands carry a particularly heavy toll. Even the simple act of maintaining a public image at his age has become a challenge. De Niro has spent decades living under constant observation, and now, in his later years, that spotlight does not dim. He must still appear presentable. He must still attend functions. He must still participate in events that drain him far more than they once did. The energy that used to drive him, once seemingly endless, now flickers, weakened by time. Yet the expectations remain unchanged. People still expect the strong, composed figure they have seen for decades, unaware of how tiring it has become for him to maintain that version of himself. The emotional exhaustion also extends into his personal relationships. As life progresses, relationships naturally evolve, often becoming more strained, more complicated, and more distant. For De Niro, these changes have been particularly difficult. The people he once leaned on are not always there in the same way. Those who once understood him deeply now feel farther away. The conflicts and disputes that have emerged in his family life over the years have left invisible wounds, wounds that continue to ache quietly.
Financial stress has also become an unexpected burden in his later years. Despite a lifetime of success, De Niro has found himself navigating situations that require constant financial management and attention. The pressures of supporting others, maintaining multiple properties, and dealing with costly legal matters have all contributed to a sense of heaviness that follows him through each day. Money, which once seemed like a symbol of stability, now feels like a source of constant concern, an irony that casts a long shadow over the peaceful retirement he should have enjoyed. But beyond all the public pressures lies another, quieter tragedy: the loss of time. At 82, De Niro has become deeply aware of how little time remains. The awareness sits with him constantly, shaping his thoughts and softening his spirit. The days no longer stretch out endlessly ahead of him. They feel shorter, faster, slipping past with a speed that is both unsettling and painful. Time, once a companion, now feels like something fragile and disappearing. This awareness of time is sharpened by the memories he carries. They follow him through the day. Memories of successes, failures, friendships, and roles. Some memories bring warmth, but others bring regret. He often reflects on choices he made throughout his life, decisions that now seem more complex when viewed through the lens of age. These reflections bring a sense of melancholy, adding to the emotional burden that grows heavier each year. Another layer of tragedy emerges in the quiet moments when De Niro sits alone. In those moments, the silence around him feels immense. It is a type of silence that comes not from peace, but from reflection, from exhaustion, from the weight of a life lived with intensity. These moments, though invisible to the public, shape much of his emotional world. They remind him of what has changed, what has been lost, and what he can never return to. Health concerns have also become a constant presence in his life. Though not always publicized, De Niro, like any man in his 80s, must confront the reality of aging. The aches, the fatigue, the slower steps, they accumulate quietly. They change how he moves, how he thinks. The man who once transformed himself physically for roles now faces the limitations of a body that no longer responds to his will. Even simple activities require patience, caution, and endurance. Perhaps one of the most heartbreaking aspects of his current life is the emotional distance that naturally forms between him and the world around him. The younger generation admires him, but they don't truly understand him. The older generation remembers him, but many of them are no longer present. Friends age, friends fade, some pass away. The circle grows smaller, and with each loss, the emotional
As Robert De
loneliness
Niro continues
deepens.
through his 82nd year, the ongoing challenges of life in the spotlight, combined with the weight of age, create a deeply somber reality. By now, the patterns of his days have become predictable, yet this predictability does not bring comfort. Instead, it highlights the slow, unrelenting passage of time and the awareness that the energy and vitality he once relied on have diminished. Each day moves at a deliberate pace, filled with moments that feel neither urgent nor particularly rewarding, but that must nonetheless be endured. The tragedy of De Niro's later years is compounded by the contrast between who he once was and who he has become. In the public imagination, he is immortalized as a man of extraordinary intensity, an actor whose presence on screen could command attention with the slightest glance or subtle gesture. In reality, he is now a man negotiating the limitations of age. The power and vigor that defined his younger self exist now more as memories than as physical attributes, and the man himself is forced to reconcile the difference. This reconciliation is neither dramatic nor cathartic. It is quiet, slow, and at times almost imperceptible, yet it weighs heavily on his spirit. Much of this period in his life is shaped by reflection. De Niro often thinks about the choices he has made, both in his personal life and in his career. He considers moments that brought joy and those that caused regret.
The intensity with which he approached work in earlier decades, a discipline that produced some of the greatest performances in cinema history, has given way to a different kind of contemplation. Now he measures life not in accolades or awards, but in moments of understanding and acceptance. Even this reflection carries a subtle form of sorrow because it is underscored by the recognition that time is finite. Family dynamics